Why is Kenya's census important? This African country is conducting yet another population count. Its outcome is expected to shift political boundaries and shape elections. But in a country divided along ethnic and tribal lines, what does that mean? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Hashem Ahelbarra. Kenya's government has been holding a historic census. Over the weekend, more than 160,000 people were deployed to collect data from its population of about 50 million. But that process has proven to be a challenge since millions of Kenyans live in slums with no official address. Millions more are nomadic herders who cross into neighbouring countries regularly. Malcolm Webb has more from Nairobi.
Kenya's government is conducting a census for the 6th time. It happens every 10 years, and the results may be significant for several reasons. State resources are allocated to each district according to population, so higher numbers of people means more money from the central government. In the last census 10 years ago, there were allegations of data rigging. This time, police say they've arrested one chief in northern Kenya for trying to double the numbers of people in his area. It's also significant in terms of politics. Ethnicity plays a key role in Kenya's politics, which are often contested on tribal lines. The census includes a question on people's ethnicity, and so the results will show which ethnic groups have grown larger, which are smaller, and politicians will be paying close attention to those numbers so that they can work out which ethnic groups they will aim to court for votes in upcoming elections. Rights groups have expressed concerns that the census goes beyond its legal mandate of a simple anonymous count of the people in Kenya, plus some simple data about them that's needed for policy making, because the census also includes questions that identify people, things such as national ID numbers. And the rights groups say it's problematic for the government to have a database of all of the people in Kenya, including all of this information, even the GPS of the home that they live in, especially in the absence of data protection law that stipulates how this data can be kept, who can access it, and what for. They say there's a risk it could be misused for discrimination or for targeting people at a later stage. There's no pre-existing comprehensive list of every physical address. Millions of Kenyans live in slums or informal settlements or shacks, so the data collectors are sent to every single home to ask people questions on their doorstep. But there are still major challenges, for example the millions of nomadic herders who often cross borders into neighbouring countries. The government hopes to collect all of the data by the end of August, but it'll take much longer to process it all. Kenyans will be waiting 3 months before they get the final results.
As Malcolm mentioned, there's a history of controversy in Kenya when it comes to censuses. That's because Kenyan politics are often contested along tribal lines, and census data determines how state resources are allocated. The 4 largest ethnic groups make up more than 60% of the population. That's according to the last census a decade ago. Kikuyus are concentrated in the country's centre and make up an estimated 22% of the population. Since independence from Britain, many have taken up prominent positions in government, including President Uhuru Kenyatta. The Lohia ethnic group account for 14% of the population. They live in the West. As a bloc, their votes are much sought after by political candidates. The third biggest group is the Luo. They make up 13% of the population and are concentrated in what was the Nyanza province in the west. Opposition leader Raila Odinga is a member of the tribe. Kalenjin account for 12% of the population and are found across the Rift Valley region. Many have taken up key positions in the government, military and state-owned companies. Let's bring in our guest from Nairobi. Demas Kiprono is lawyer and campaign manager at Amnesty International Kenya. Jonathan Offei-Ansah is journalist and publisher of AfricaBriefing, a Pan-African magazine based in London. Patrick Gathara is writer and political analyst. Welcome to the program. Demas, is there a general sentiment among Kenyans that this census in particular is about building more understanding of the demographics, or there's a political agenda behind it?
Judging from the secrecy that has surrounded this exercise, for example, the Statistics Act that is the basis for the census was signed, and amendments were signed into law just 2 weeks ago. And there were certain questions that don't seem relevant for a census that were asked during this exercise. So it seems like there was no transparency in the whole process, and which many Kenyans would suggest that there could be some nefarious things going on.
Jonathan, why is this census divisive among the Kenyans?
Well, census is held in every country every 10 years. I live in England, and the census is held here every 10 years, every 10 or so years. But a country like Kenya, where tribal and ethnic, sensibilities are very, very they're high. I think enough care must be taken to avoid any suspicions, any suspicions on behalf of the people and the government. Look, Kenya has suffered a lot of two major terrorist attacks, in recent times. Okay, so in the government asking certain questions, I think it's in line, they need to do that to be able to identify, who lives where, who is a true Kenyan, who is a foreigner, and so on and so forth. But, in the absence of adequate data protection, look, again, I live in England, right? And I can give some certain information about me, safe in the knowledge that that information is protected by data. It's actually protected. It will not fall to your wrong hands. Okay. So the government, having said that, the government too has to embark, or should have embarked on a very extensive, long, public information campaign, right, to sensitize the people as to why they need, for such information to be provided. Enough consultation should have been done, but it shouldn't have been done arbitrarily. That is where I have a problem with the whole exercise.
I see your point.
But I think providing data and so on and so forth. And again, look, the government issues passports. The government issues national identity cards. So you do not have to ask me, in answering the census questions, to indicate my passport number and provide my national identity number. You registered me, so you should know all my details. You should know all these details.
Patrick, if this is an exercise to further build a relation between the government and the people, many people are asking what's the point behind a census when in 1999 there was a crucial one, but then the results were never made public. It took people many, many years for some of those details to trickle down in the media.
Well, first, the thing to remember is, as Jonathan has mentioned, the census is required by law every 10 years to be carried out. The important thing is also that the census information is really supposed to be simply for statistics and research purposes, so that the government can formulate policies, can know how to allocate resources. It is not necessary, and in fact, it is forbidden by law for the government to use this to directly identify people, to directly target individuals. That is actually would be completely illegal as per the statistics law that Demas had mentioned before. I think it's also important for us to recall that there's a context here. that the government itself has, in previous times, collected people's data and then utilized it for the purposes that it was not intended. So, for example, in the run-up to the 2017 elections, when people were being asked to register to vote, in certain cases, that information was taken, was combined with information the government already has about mobile phone users, because you've got to register your SIM card every time you get one. And then they use that to try and push up turnout or people registering for the vote in particular regions where they wanted particular candidates to win. You know, and even especially in the presidential election where they thought they had strongholds, they tried and push up a turnout there. You'd get a call from your local chief, you know, or your your local government official to essentially tell you, you know, you haven't registered, you know, go and do to vote, go and do this. But then you're asking, how did you know I haven't registered? This is not data he was supposed to have. How did you get my phone number? This is not information he was supposed to have. So given this context, it's quite worrying that now in the census, where data is supposed to be anonymized, that government is insisting on collecting ID numbers where they can then pair up what you have said in the census with who you are as an individual. And then who knows what they're going to use that information for. We have an election in 3 years' time. Will they again try and manipulate this data to try and affect the result of the elections? We don't know. If the data is meant to be anonymous, it should be anonymized from the beginning. Don't collect data that's going to identify people.
So in this case,
that is not necessary. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics has said it does not require this information. So why they're collecting it leaves quite a bad taste in the mouth.
Fair enough. I see your point, Demas. So it seems that the government now is faced with a balancing act, the need to respect the terms of the Statistics Act that calls for the need to respect privacy and anonymity, but at the same time, the government says it has the right to conduct the survey. Is the government willing, or can it maintain and implement this census with respecting the statistics law?
Yes, so for the first time, the census is being conducted in a digital manner. The previous census was paper-based. This time, they are using tablets that have things like geotagging that will geotag everyone's house when they, after they answer the questions. So the government had 9 years to plan for this. The data protection law is in Parliament. It is not being fast-tracked. So why are we collecting digital data, private data about citizens, yet we do not have a legal framework to protect data? About 3 months ago, the government rolled up another program for digital and biometric identification. All this data was collected. There is no data protection framework. So it seems like there's no genuine willingness by the government to protect the rights of privacy, to uphold the constitution, which enshrines that right to privacy. So far, the evidence is that the government is not willing, despite all the assurances.
Jonathan, we're talking about a country that was marred by violence. 2007 was a clear example of the violence that erupted in the country because of the huge differences over the political landscape. When you conduct a survey or a census in a country like Kenya, don't you run the risk of further stoking that sentiment that has prevailed in the past?
Yes, there's that risk. I mean, I recall the previous census that was held, I think, in 1999. I mean, it nearly sparked some violence. And as I recall, the results of the census were not even released. So, I mean, the government should have learned lessons, from all this. We have this post-electoral violence in a few years ago, right? So the government should have taken all this into consideration. And that is why, and if it felt it needed to gather all this information, right? What it had to do, like I said earlier on, was to educate the public. I mean, like the previous speaker said, it had 9 years, to do this census. So between that, from then until now, it had all the time, and I believe all the resources, the machinery, to educate the people, sensitize the people that the next census, will be different from the norm. We'll be collecting this or that data from you, and so on and so forth. And also make sure to avoid any doubts, any suspicions, from the people, from civil society, and so on and so forth. It should have made sure that the Data Protection Act before Parliament that the colleague mentioned about should have been passed by now. That would have given the people some confidence. And again, it would have allayed any fears or suspicion, that the government maybe was trying to gather this information, for political and election purposes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Though, having said that again, I believe that in the interest of security, I mentioned earlier on the 2 major terrorist attacks that occurred in Kenya and other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. The government needs to gather this data, to be able to plan its security activities well. Yes, but then on the other hand, it should have put all the necessary measures in place to allay any fears, to allay any suspicions, on behalf of the people.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, if a census is generally speaking about the need to...
could I just quickly respond to that?
Please, go ahead.
Right. First, with regard to the 1999 census, it's only data about one question that was not released, and that was the question around the makeup of ethnic groups. So how many people that had. In the 2009 census, the same question was asked, and that data was released. And I think with reference to the 2009 census, there were concerns prior to the census being carried out that asking that question, given that we had just come out of post-election violence in 2008, that might have sparked some the concerns that might sort of build up tensions, but that didn't happen. With regard to terrorism and security, again, I really have to insist that the census data being collected is not to be used to target individuals. It has to be anonymized. By law, it has to be anonymized. So the idea that the government is collecting ID numbers so that it can target people, whether they be suspected terrorists or not, is itself illegal. That act would be an illegal one. This is simply so that government can know how many people are in some particular places for the purpose of allocating resources, not for the purpose of enforcing law against them. And in fact, the law is clear that the data cannot be used for any other purpose, so they cannot share it, or they're not allowed to share it, for example, with law enforcement forces or security forces. They're not allowed to share it with prosecutorial forces. So I think Jonathan is wrong there. There is no reason why, at least in the context of the census, why government should be allowed and should go out to be hoovering up data that can allow it to specifically target individual citizens.
Mm-hmm. Demas, when it comes to a government that has been saying that is been coming under attacks by armed groups and therefore installed the Nyumba Kuni, which is the right for people to pass on information, intelligence gathering to the government, the massive surveillance platform that was put into place. But then when you go to a census, why would you ask people questions that would raise many suspicions among them?
In fact, when Amnesty International first raised the alarm about why they were asking for passport and ID numbers, the government responded by saying that they wanted to know how many people have genuine IDs, documentation. However, if you look at the Statistics Act, that is totally that is the mandate of another, the Department of Registrations. It's not the mandate of the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. So from the word go, the suspicions are raised, and you find that it looks like the government has its own ideas on what it wants to do, and it is not really perhaps following the law. we agree that Kenya has security challenges. However, the measures that we have taken already in terms of surveillance, intelligence, all done within the law is enough to combat these challenges that we face, such as terrorism.
Jonathan, this is a recurrent issue across Africa. I mean, the censuses and the issue of the political, ethnic and tribal divide. African Union has established Vision 2030, where it says that we need to have censuses to be able to make projections about the shifting demographics and what kind of resources we have to put in place. But when you come and ask me an anachronistic question like about my own ethnic affiliation, what kind of purpose is it going to serve the development in a country like Kenya?
Africa, before I answer this question, let me respond again to the other guy's response to what I said earlier. What I said, I just tried to play the devil's advocate, with what I said previously about the gathering information to fight, to fight terrorism and for security of the country. I'll just try to play the devil's advocate. But to answer your question, look, tribalism, it's and ethnic tendencies exists in most countries, but it is more so in others, in some countries than in others. I am a Ghanaian, and we have tribes, about at least 12 tribes in the country. But the incidence of tribalism, ethnicity is not as pronounced as it is in, I'm sorry to say, in Kenya, right? So I do not know how this problem of ethnicity, ethnic tendencies, and so on and so forth, could be tackled. But censuses mainly, I'm not an economist, but for this line of economics, censuses are made to know how many people, live in region 1, region 2, area B, area C, right, in order to help the government allocate resources, to these areas and to various regions. But invariably, like I said earlier on, there needs to be some public information campaign.
I see
education, your point. To try and change the people's mindset that, look, census is being held not for any nefarious purpose, right, but to help the government, allocate resources, for example, to help the government develop, the country effectively.
Which,
though, having said that, in reality, more often than not, the motives, are more, can I say, sinister, than noble. Yeah.
Patrick, this is going to be my question to Patrick. We know how it works in a country like Kenya, where a predominant ethnic group goes to an election, then strikes an alliance with a kingmaker and come to power. It's been historic. Is there any concern that new findings in the new census that could change the demographics or show new realities could upset the prevailing political order in Kenya? And this is why many people are anxious. Patrick.
Well, I don't expect that it will, but again, you're right in the sense that the data, the way it is utilized and how it's manipulated, does get people worried. In the 2009 census, there was sort of incredible numbers being reported from particular areas of the country that were then found out to be completely untrue. And it's this sort of manipulation that is worrying. And I think even in 1999, it was the same issue where the government did not like what the data said about ethnic composition of the country. So I think that, yes, there are people who are concerned around this. Mostly, for me, it is the politicians who might cause trouble around the numbers, because they use their ethnic groups as bargaining chips, and the more people you can claim under your ambit, then the more you can claim.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Patrick Gathara, Demas, Kiprono, Jonathan, Offei-Ansah, I really appreciate your contribution to the program. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.